What's going on, guys? TheCardGuyz here. We've got a crazy change going on in Flesh and Blood. It was just announced. Joined with me, I'm Kyle. I have Nathan, Josh, and Alex. We're kind of gonna go over what just happened with this announcement. We got the band cards announcement, and wow, that's all I can say. First and foremost. Pre-thoughts. What do you guys think before, like, one word? How can you describe this change?
Prism.
Dorinthia.
That's my one word.
Or Reinar. Yeah, Reinar. Yeah,
I just have a wow face on this one because this is. Let's get into it because this is just crazy. Looks like first and foremost they errated Briar to trigger her Earth tokens once per turn.
Only on the first one.
Yes, only on the first one.
So you can still miss your triggers.
Yes,
absolutely.
Yes, you can.
So all you people that missed your arcane damage triggers in sealed and draft, nothing changes.
Nope, nothing changes. Nothing changes whatsoever. Shout out Dante Delfico. If you know, you know. So banded restricted, crazy enough, they actually decided in Classic Constructed to immediately, not immediately, but effective on January 17th, which, if I'm not mistaken, is the day
Monday.
after the Nationals.
They're exempting the Nationals and the side events at the National. Or sorry, they're exempting the actual Nationals itself, but not the side events at the Nationals.
Okay, so all side events will be with this change.
Yes, it'll be in effect.
Okay, so in Classic Constructed we have Ball Lightning Band and Plunder Run Band.
Yes.
All three pitch values.
All three, like all 9 of these cards are banned.
Yeah, for anybody new to this game, banning one card actually means banning 3 a lot of times, unless they've make any sort of specific announcement otherwise, which I don't believe they've done to date. Could be in the future, but as of right now, when you ban one card, you ban the red, the yellow, and the blue version of it, since one card has 3 printings that have 3 different effects. But they haven't, to date, done anything where they've banned one of a 3 set cards.
We might see that day soon, but also, Alex, in Blitz, effective January 17th as well, you have Ball Lightning and Duskblade banned.
Yes.
So
I was happy about the Duskblade ban, and that's only in Blitz. It was already banned in CC, so it created an environment that just wasn't healthy, in my opinion. It's a card. The design of the card is inherently flawed, which is why they banned it immediately and said that they made a mistake. I think they were incorrect to ban it only in one format, but I think they kind of wanted to give people an area to play with that card, considering some people had invested in some gold foil Duskblades and things like that before the set had even come out. And I think they wanted to give people a chance to play with it before they gave it the axe.
I'm sure a lot of players will be able to abuse Duskblade in PvE. Don't worry.
There you go. Yeah,
for sure.
And in the multiplayer format. But if you piss people off in the multiplayer format, maybe you get ganged up on. So they're like, maybe you don't run Duskblade in that format. I don't know.
And also, CC is a much more important format for ban.
Blitz is more casual, so I see why they didn't immediately ban it for Blitz. Just to let it play out for a little bit before doing anything. So I guess big picture here, Josh. What are your overall thoughts on how they tackled this, and did they tackle it correctly?
Well, starting off with the Briar Errata. Generally, I'm not a big fan of Errata in card games, especially physical card games, because that means if you let's say you're a less engaged player and you don't know about this change, I mean, this could be an issue. However, it seems like this is an interesting test to see how they're going to implement the Errata. Are they going to print a couple bricks of Briar tokens and distribute them to LGSs? Not bad. That's a decent solution. Are they Did they put this token into set 6? Very unlikely, because that's already been printed and shipped around. Is this going to be in set 7? Possibly. If I had to guess, this is probably going to be like in an armory kit later, like as a just give participants this.
Yeah, I think it'll incentivize the promotion
Yep.
of another Briar at some point.
Yep.
Yeah.
So logistically, that's the first thing I'm kind of curious about. But in terms of the actual change, being able to only have one embodiment of Earth, that means the non-attack action cards will be blocking for 3 or for 4, and that was a constraint on a lot of aggressive decks, because not only did Briar have excellent armor, but coupled with excellent defensive cards means on important on-hit cards, like let's say Command and Conquer, they could put a card plus an armor down, and literally no other hero can put a single card and a single armor piece down other than like Karen Husk, right? Because to get to 4 block, that generally is a defense reaction. Can't play defense reactions against Command and Conquer, right? So they enabled them to do a lot of things that they're no longer going to be able to do. That I think is going to be a positive change. It opens up some possibilities in the meta game.
Yeah,
yeah.
Go ahead. I was gonna say, I think the text that they used to describe the situation was "damned if you do, damned if you don't," and I think that describes it perfectly.
Sure, I agree.
Any deck playing against Briar was, is like, okay, the general flow of a Flesh and Blood game is what, okay, I have a really good hand. I'm going to get back into this game by taking the damage and swinging back. You can't take the damage versus Briar because they're going to have a 5 block, a 6 block, and a 5 block in their hand when you come back at them because of all of the embodiments. So if you sit back and take the damage, you lose. If you take the damage, you lose. So it created an environment that they obviously goes against kind of the general flow of what a Flesh and Blood game is supposed to.
So
like.
I can speak. I played 2 heroes that have vastly different equipment. I've played fridge heroes like Dorinthia, and I've played more brittle heroes like Ketsu, and both of them against Briar. Like Ketsu against Briar is there's no way you can pivot a turn. Without armor. So like in Dorinthia versus Briar, like you basically have to use all your armor on one turn to deny embodiments and then go for it. Where that's not even an option for heroes without armor. So that already like the once Briar rose to prominence, we saw Ketsu aggro just fall off the map because Briar aggro was better. Briar aggro was better, and without sufficient armor, they could never pivot the game on a critical turn against Briar. So this change is going to open up the metagame a bit. However, I think the other changes, these other changes actually affect several heroes. We've been talking about Briar a lot. However, the Ball Lightning, Plunder Run, and even the Duskblade ban in Blitz affect multiple heroes. The 2 heroes that use Plunder Run the most right now are Briar and Chain. So those are like, it's not just those. Like there are other heroes that actually use Plunder Run. Like Ketsu aggro uses it to some degree.
You use it in Bolton.
Yep. Raiden Bolton also uses Plunder Run. And what other heroes use Plunder Run? Let's see.
Anybody that wants to go wide and attack.
Right.
Yeah.
There was no downside to the card. So.
Yeah.
Those are the main culprits of using it, though, for sure.
Yeah. So those 4 heroes are the ones that are mainly gonna be affected by this. We don't. I guess we don't have our resident Chain player here, but I guess we could still chit chat about how this affects Chain's game plan. So
for sure,
the Plunder Run really enabled spiky turns in terms of those were the turns where you could push more damage than they had block in their hand, and with Soul Shackle, with Spellbound Creepers, you had enough sources of go again so that you could create 18, 20, 24 damage turns with Plunder Run. And being able to play Plunder Run at instant speed as well with the Spellbound Creepers is no longer an option.
That's what I was gonna say. I feel like I feel like the chain in general definitely got a big hit from Plunder Run being banned because you can't abuse it with the creepers. And so I think it changes the main goal of the deck a third time, because you can just cheese out a draw trigger and then into a 3 more attack turn just because you generated that extra, action point. I feel like Chain is probably in its worst spot it's been in after that hit.
And one of Chain's main game plans was, I'm going to take all the damage because my turn's going to be better than your turn.
Yeah.
And a lot of that centered around their Plunder Run turns. Like, the game would kind of be even until they had that red Plunder Run from Arsenal turn. And they have Arcanite, Skullcap, Grasp of the Arcanite, and Carrion Husk.
Carrion Husk.
So like Josh was talking about with Dorinthia, giving all of the equipment to a turn to turn it around. That's exactly what Chain does as well. But they have Carrion Husk, which is a one-time block for 6.
It's a time walk.
And then plunder run you back, and you can't recover from that. And that's one of the things that LSS said in the article for banning was it created a game state that was irrecoverable from, like you just cannot get back in the game after somebody hits you with a Plunder Run. And I think if Plunder Run only stuck for the first attack, it would have been a far more balanced card, like most things do.
Right.
Like a Nimbleism or something like that, where it's like the next thing gets +3 or whatever, but it costs 0. Something like that, but Chain's ability to attack you 5 times in one turn with Art of War and Shadow Puppetry and things that give go again, and having natural go again on his hero creates a state where they're like, okay, I'll bait out like that first one. We're like, all right, I'll Plunder Run into like a Shadow of Ursa for free or something, where it's like, oh, I don't want to block that, but I also don't want you to draw a card. But even if I block that, your next ghostly visit and your unhallowed rites and whatever else is coming afterwards,
it just discouraged you to block altogether, right? Like,
right, you just felt like you couldn't ever block enough is what it kind of feels like.
It's like, if you're just gonna do 20 damage to me, like, God, you're gonna get this draw. Like,
exactly.
Choose wisely at that point, I guess, what to block. But
something that is kind of an inside joke here that we talked about pre-show is, this card would be totally fine if it was printed as Plunder Jog. That if it only affected the next attack action card played,
right,
that would be okay. But the fact that it lasts the whole turn creates situations where you have to block out pretty much. It restricts your decisions that you can make.
Yeah.
In terms of decisions, this actually creates another interesting point here that maybe we haven't considered is, generally against decks that run Plunder Run, you want to go first, because
setting up
them arsenaling a Plunder Run is one of the worst possible things you could do.
Yep.
So this actually might incentivize, I don't know. I mean, I think Chain still wants to go first, but there might be an argument for Briar wanting to go second now.
I think there's also a consideration with Everfest coming up, and it's going to be the first time we've gotten some generic cards in a while. I think there's a high likelihood that we get something that's going to be an Arsenal slot generic card of some sort very, very soon to replace it, but at a much lower power level.
Or more attacks, too, because they lost 9 Ball Lightnings, and I think, like Nathan said, it really hurts Entwine Lightning in the deck, too.
Right.
What do you think some of the changes that you can make to the deck now, or is it just not even worth playing till after Everfest?
Talking about Chain?
No, I'm talking about Briar at this point.
Briar? Let's ask Nathan. Nathan, what do you think are some of the changes you're considering for Briar right now?
He's the Briar aficionado.
As far as Lightning Briar, no dice. Just unsleeve it, throw it in the trash, and that's its best place. Now for Earth Briar, it's completely unchanged. I think some Earth decks, they ran the Plunder Runs, but those can be easily replaced. No big deal. The Mount Heroic deck, which is the one that I play, is probably the toughest one that's going to require some figuring out, because you lost, depending on, some people run the blue balls, but most just run the red and yellow. So that's 6 attacks that fuse Entwine Lightning, which is now much weaker. So really, you need to replace 9 attack actions that have built-in go again in some sense that don't require any additional costs, like Scar for Scar being a lower life or anything like that. It was just a card that you looked in your hand and you were like, okay, I don't have to figure out how to give this card go again, which in and of itself, I mean, there's people that play with Captain's Call, which is giving a whole card up to give another card go again.
Exactly.
So that's just how valuable that card or those 2 words at the bottom of the text are in perspective. But I think Mount Heroic will still be a tier 1, tier 1.5 probably, because I think a couple cards, and something in Everest. All we need is one good card with go again built into it, and that deck is back up and running.
Right.
You lose the Sting Ball combo, so
Thank
yeah,
God.
which is fair. Which is fair, but Briar's still not worried about fatigue. She has Evergreen, so tomorrow Pulse of Candlehold. She's not worried about fatigue strategy, not too much. But yeah, Lightning Briar's just gone.
Yeah,
That's it.
I can pretty much agree with that.
You mentioned tiers, and we've mostly been talking about how several heroes have gotten worse, but this change also makes several heroes better indirectly because the metagame is
mostly the heroes that were
whole.
good before this metagame became a thing.
Kind of.
Yeah. So I
think
guess
Cat 2 might have a chance again.
We're kind of reverting back to late Monarch the late Monarch metagame.
Like June or July, I'd want to say, is where we're at right now, like late July.
I would love to see some control and aggro Katsu on the tables again. I think that would be a fantastic sight.
What do you think of the 2 ice decks that are currently in the metagame or prominently in the metagame because of their positive matchups against Briar, namely Ice Lexi and Oldhim?
I think Oldham's going to see a huge downtick. The reason for Oldham was Briar, and the thing that beats Oldham is Prism, and Prism's going to see a big uptick. And I just cannot see Oldham being a good choice with how many Prisms are going to be on the tables now. Lexi, on the other hand, I think is still a fantastic deck. I always thought that Lexi was a good deck. I don't think it's going to be tier 0 or tier 1, but I think it's going to sit right in that tier 1.5 slot, which makes it competitive in most of its matchups, and it's also a very fun deck to play, so I think we're still going to see a lot of Lexi.
The Lexi deck also has some pretty complicated lines of play. That means like the people that are skilled at piloting those decks are still going to see success with that deck.
Exactly.
Those type of decks like Lexi is a skill amplifier type of deck.
What do you think about Bolton and Dorinthia, Josh?
It's hard to say at the moment. My gut feeling, let's break it down one by one. Let's talk about Bolton. So there's 2 types of Bolton decks. There's actually 3, but I generally advise not playing
We'll ignore the hybrid version.
I generally advise against playing the hybrid version. So there's Raiden Bolton and Saber's Bolton. So Raiden Bolton, in this case, did lose Plunder Run. That makes his game against slightly more controlling decks a little bit harder. In the past, there are certain cards such as they're basically two schools of thought on how to play Raiden Bolton. One is you put down your charge card, you charge your soul, and then you say, do you want to block this? And if they say no, then you put your attack reaction down, and then you give it go again, and you continue like that, right? Mm-hmm. Assuming this isn't Take Flight, of course. That's the first way of thinking of it, is using your attack reactions to buff the power, and then giving it go again with your hero ability. The other way that you could play Bolton is you pre-combat pump it. So you play things like Seek Enlightenment or Nimblism or whatever pre-combat, and then you play or Plunder Run from Arsenal, and then you play the play the Bolt of Courage, the or whatever card you're playing, right? Pre-combat. That style in general was a little bit weaker. However, Plunder Run was kind of the exception to that rule. So if we see people kind of going towards the pre-combat pump, it's probably going to have to be Nimblism. So yeah, I think Raid and Bolton gets a little bit worse. You were kind of reliant on the Plunder Run turns in some matchups, but you weren't entirely dependent on it. So it's
Bolton just doesn't have much card draw.
Yeah, you can throw in Nimblism and it should be okay, but I think we're just gonna have to wait and see on that. So in terms of their matchups, so the Raid and Bolton against Briar was pretty tough. I would say in general you'd have to high roll a little bit, they'd have to low roll a little bit. So in that case, I think that kind of just evens it out a bit, and it makes it a more dynamic match now that their offense is a little bit weaker and their defense is a little bit weaker. It just feels like a little bit more of it'll be more of a mid-range match, which is nice for Bolton. As for the Sabres build should not have any changes because they don't use Plunder Run. If the lightning decks generally were pretty quick, but they were just if you defended properly, you would actually be okay against the lightning decks, I'd say in general, with Saber Bolton. So I think that just tips it a little bit more into their favor. As for Dorinthia against Briar and Chain. So actually, I think against Chain that becomes a very interesting matchup, because I think you can actually fatigue Chain now as Dorinthia. Like,
okay,
one of the
100%, yeah.
One of the tactics that you can use as Dorinthia, because you have access to Steelblade Shunt and Tunic, is you can get some very, very, very efficient blocks with Steelblade Shunt, or by, let's say they have arcane damage coming at you, you pitch, block the arcane damage, shunt the attack, something like that. That you can get very, very, very efficient as Dorinthia. All your cards block for 3, and they don't really expect you to try to fatigue them. So I think you can actually catch a lot of people off guard with that. As for traditional kind of more aggressive Dorinthia against Chain, just not having Plunder Run is probably, like, there were certain turns where you had to defend as Dorinthia because of the Plunder Run trigger being active the whole turn, right? So I think the fact that Chain no longer has like gigantic detrimental on-hit effects means if you have a good hand, you can just go, right? So that makes the whole process a little bit easier for them. Dorinthia against Briar, this in theory becomes way easier now, because the difference between 1 and 2 and 3 embodiments is the difference between...
It's absurd.
One is the difference between a pulse of Candlehold and a piece of armor blocking your Steelblade Supremacy turn. Like,
yeah,
like
your hit effects are going to resolve a whole lot more now.
Yeah, and again, with the Plunder Run not being there, the on-hit effects of Briar are reduced. Briar actually had the best on-hit effect of all time, right? In that on-hit, I get an embodiment. Now it's like, well, okay, you can have one. Go ahead.
Right.
Now, if you think about it, like the errata on Briar is actually perhaps more important. So I think for both of the Warriors matchups, they get better in general. Yeah. Especially in Blitz without Duskblade. There's some threat of being cheesed out by Duskblade as Dorinthia. If you don't draw a hand that attacks fast enough, you can actually get kind of cheesed out by Duskblade. That almost happened to me several times. So yeah, that's I think it's just generally better for those 2 heroes.
That's good.
How about Prism? I've been talking a lot. So let's talk about how Prism performs now against Chain and Briar.
I've played the matchup quite a few times. Prism was I've played Briar into Prism, and I've played Prism against Briar. It was like a 10% win rate for Prism, if that. Like, I mean, it might have been even much worse than that. It's just not winnable hardly. The Briar deck just does everything that the Prism deck cannot handle, and multiple sources of damage to get rid of any of the shields. Blocking is super efficiently, even when you can't block enough. Like, you could never get any value out of your Phantasmal Footsteps against Briar. There wasn't anything the Prism deck could do. You can try to attack through them, but they're going to attack you much harder. So the aggro plan didn't work. If you went to the aura plan, they could just ignore your auras and kill you, because they hit with so much damage. And I played the Briar into Prism many times, and I left my Prism opponent with like 3 auras on the board at the end of the game, and the life total was
you just didn't care.
Yeah, the life total was 25-0 or something, or 30-0. It just doesn't matter. Like, because my arcane damage is hitting your shields to get those out of the way, and then my everything that I attack with is breakpoint, so you're not blocking efficiently ever, and so you can try to fatigue me, but it's not going to work. So the Prism gets a huge boost in that sense, where its worst matchup in the format was Briar. And with Briar being much worse now, it's going to be a lot better. As you guys know from Vegas and other tournaments, Briar into Chain, or Prism into Chain, was unique in that if you built a traditional Prism deck, it was not going to be favored against Chain. But if you built a heavy fatigue plan deck, which you can in Prism, because you just have everything blocks for 3, you have footsteps for when the Chain breaks, when they soul shackle, so you can punish them really hard when they soul shackle at the wrong time. The Carrion Husk was a nice, kind of like save me from the erudition kind of a play that they had against you. But the Plunder Run was what really pushed them through and allowed them to compete with the fatigue strategies. And so getting rid of Plunder Run is huge. So I think Prism's going to have a much better time against Chain now. Because we can choose to fatigue if they start drawing really well, or we can choose to set up a bunch of auras or whatever it is. So our Arclight Sentinels are still in the deck. We still have ways to combat those other strategies, but now that they didn't have back when they had Seeds of Agony, we had to go really, really heavy on the fatigue plan, because it's so easy for Prism to pitch a blue and hit one with Null Rune, one with Phantasmal Footsteps, use all the resources extremely, extremely well. And so I think that plan is still there. So I just think that Prism gets way better in this format, because the only thing keeping Prism out of the format was Briar. And when you've got Briar as 45% of the field, you are not going to dodge it at a big tournament. Right. Much less when you get to the top tables and you're playing it 80% of your matches. It's just not going to happen. So with that being off the table now, we're hoping, obviously we're making this as a theoretical call right now, but I think Prism didn't really have any other hugely bad matchups other than Dash, which is a deck we haven't talked about much, and I think actually gets a boost from this as well. So
I'm actually really interested in knowing what Nathan thinks about Viserai, because Viserai was starting to see a really big play because of Briar, and then now that we're not going to see Briar as much, I don't know if that shifts Viserai's power if it stays, I guess. So what do you think about that, Nathan?
So Viserai definitely got even better. Some people would say that it's the best deck in the format right now, but some people are not convinced, which is fine. But literally, there's anywhere between 4 and 6 sideboard slots that are dedicated to Lightning Briar matchup, which are the defense reactions, the sigils, the sink belows. So that frees up so much more space to handle something like a Prism. It also creates leniency. So like the Matt Rogers list, for example, doesn't run the Arknight Shard. Well, why not? It creates Rune's Chant. It's a blue. It doesn't block. That's the problem. Well, if you take away Plunder Run, the card that doesn't block just increased in value, because now it's not as punishing if you draw that card. And so if it can produce another replacing value, then it just pays itself off, right? So now all the Arknight shards are going to go into the Viscera decks, makes the OTK faster. Then you have, it's still got a good matchup against Prism, because we can put in some tech like, maybe some leaded charges or whatever, and we still have Creepers, which is, a time skippers basically. We can get that action point whenever we need it, to get over that Arknight Sentinel, and we're good to go. So I think Viscera is in a really good spot, because Viscera is one of the only decks that has a solid game plan on whether the format speeds up or slows down, because they can go to the OTK if it slows down. And yeah, that's what I'm looking at for Viscera.
Agreed.
Kind of agree with that, actually, now thinking about it.
As a Prism player, I want to play that matchup a whole lot more now. That's a matchup I want to practice a lot, just to iron out and see who's favored, because I have some ideas for how to make the Prism matchup a lot better against Viscera, but I think that's going to be a really key matchup now, and I think that's honestly a fun matchup to watch and a fun matchup to play. So I think I don't think anybody's going to have a problem with that.
People are gonna learn a lot from this conversation when we announce that Patreon here very shortly, and they're gonna wanna get in on it before everybody else finds out about these crazy techs that we're gonna have. So we haven't even talked about Bravo. I don't even think it's even talk worthy, because Bravo is always gonna be like a top 2, right? Like
Bravo's always gonna do Bravo things,
right?
That deck is just kind of immortal, honestly, unless you're playing against Prism.
It just does what it does so well, right? Like it can cripple and crush you on turn 2 or turn 20, and it's always impactful. It can block the whole game if it wants to, because everything blocks so efficiently, and then it can hit you with a 6-power hammer. It just does that so well. There's no other deck that can just keep pitching and keep pitching and keep pitching, and always, even the pitch cards when they come back around late game, still hit you for 6 or 8.
The only issue that I currently see with Bravo is that if Prism and Dash rise to prominence, those are 2 matchups that Bravo has traditionally struggled in. At least at most maybe 40-60 on that matchup. So if there's more Prism, if there's more Dash, that is going to be a little bit of a problem for Bravo. Let's talk a little bit about Dash. That's actually a hero we haven't talked too much about.
I agree.
So Dash traditionally is built, at least against Briar and against Chain, is built more defensively, because even if you boost, you'd have to get very lucky to actually out damage them. So generally the Dash players against Briar and Chain are building them defensively. So do you think after this change they're still going to be building them more defensively, or do you think if there's enough slowdown in the Chain and the Briar that they can go aggro now? Or
I think the mid-range plan for Dash was always the best plan, in my opinion. I think that's what makes decks like Viscera, decks like Prism, any of these decks that can produce 2 game plans with just their sideboard, are gonna be successful. And I think Dash being able to go kind of right in the middle, and figure out what the game plan they want to play based off of their matchup. They don't have to allot as many sideboard slots now to the defensive plan, so they're going to have a few more slots, I think, that open up for other game plans. I don't know if you guys agree with that, but
the deck already has 2 inherently good matchups against Bravo and against Prism, so I believe we're just going to see it regardless. And since we're opening up so many more sideboard slots, I think it makes it harder for those 2 decks to even beat her. So she's
just so good.
Yeah,
She's so good.
It's just like you were talking about Viscera. She's able to go super defensive, or she's able to defend a card or defend 2 cards and be able to do an attack plus pew pew. You know,
I think the only reason that she's underrepresented is because of her difficulty to play. It's a lot of actions per turn, which a lot of people struggle with keeping up with triggers, and that's why you saw the really good players rise to the top with Briar. A lot of actions per turn, a lot of triggers to manage, and it's very, very easy to lose with Dash because you forgot to, activate your induction chamber 1 turn, or something like that. It's a very punishing deck. It needs to go very smoothly and set up for that end game. And a lot of people are very narrow-minded in thinking about like, okay, this is the here and now. I need to do this here and now, and not think about like, okay, this turn where I have this Spark of Genius, do I need to block with this Spark of Genius, or do I need to go get a Plasma Purifier because I know that this game's going to go for 20 more turns, and my 1 more damage with my pistol 2 times for the next 18 turns is going to get me there. There's just a lot of thought process, I think, with the deck, a lot of forward thinking, and you can play end games with it, or you can play fast with the boosting plan. Just a fun deck, and I think it will see a lot more Dash.
Yeah. Something I want to talk about logistically is, if you look on the scheduled banned and restricted announcement, this was made December 14th.
Didn't they say it was
by
gonna come out
LSS?
a couple days before?
They said the next BNR was February 2nd.
Yeah, a couple days before Everfest.
That's why in the back of my head I was like, wait, what? When I first saw the announcement, I was like, wait, what?
Got a little
This is all of a sudden. So this means that LSS has their scheduled BNR, but they're not afraid to just be like, hey, okay, you know what?
Right.
I think the cancellation of some of the callings and the realization that it wasn't changing anytime soon was the reason for it. But I think they were like, we're gonna hold off on this list because we still have a national season to keep playing, so we don't want to interrupt that. But they're like, nothing's changing. Let's go ahead and get this out, as soon as possible, so people have the appropriate amount of time to adjust and build their decks and whatnot. And then also we can go ahead and make all the side events at those events, and start implementing the changes, because I think they wanted to make a lot of the changes, they just couldn't in the middle of the season, and I completely agree with that call.
The next scheduled BNR is April 5th.
April 5th, yeah.
So that is
right?
after the ProQuest season, so unless there's something majorly broken, we are unlikely to see anything until April 5th. Although last time they said there wasn't going to be one until February, and here we are talking about it in the middle of January. So
emergency bans happen sometimes.
Yeah,
I guess you could say. Prism. I guess you could say with this April 5th date, we're probably going to be expecting very soon Pro Tour announcements. And so that's probably what that's going to lead to, is going into the Pro Tour season right after the ProQuest season. So,
those announcements have to be coming
very soon.
Coming not too long. Sometime around the Everfest release, I would assume that.
I would think so too. I'm excited for our preview card we get to see very soon and get to figure out some sort of content.
Tomorrow, hopefully.
Wait, hold on, what?
It's supposed to come in the mail tomorrow.
Oh,
really?
We can't talk about it.
Nope.
No.
I'm excited to.
Only for my eyes.
I will bust down that door.
You just stick it behind the plunder run. Nobody will look there, right?
Yeah, there you go.
Nobody will ever find it.
Rest in peace. Overall, though, I think this is gonna be healthier for the game. It's gonna slow it down. It's just gonna be an overall healthier game state. A lot more decisions to be made in a game now, instead of just, okay, I'm taking all this damage or whatever else. It's gonna be a bit of a return to the crucible of war.
Yep.
Adapt to what is happening in the game style, rather than Chain was kind of like, especially with Seeds of Agony, was just go. go, don't block, go, right?
Right.
And same with Briar was generally like, don't block, just go, right? So the return to a more mid-range format is always welcome. I believe there's more decisions to be made, which is nice.
Always a mid-range person. Every game I play, I'm always a mid-range fan. And I just think that we used to call them fair decks. And
the fair decks. Yeah, I remember those days.
And I'm okay with some unfair decks being in the format because it balances things and makes sideboarding, crucial, and keeping slots available for decks that can just get you. Kind of like Saber's Bolton. It's one of those decks where like Chain almost had to concede at one point or another to Saber's Bolton. There's just nothing that we could have done to like stop that combo. If they get there before we get there, they just win. And I think decks like that, they at least need to be in the back of your mind when you're playing, right? Like they don't. I don't know. Like I would love to see some support for Kano. Honestly. Just because I think it's an underrepresented deck. It's very powerful, and I think there's a lot of people out there that would love to play it. And I like to see all of the decks have some representation. When I sit down at my tournament tables, I don't want to know what I'm playing against. I want it to be, oh, I'm playing against this. Okay, cool. I don't want to be like. Because you go to Las Vegas, it was chain. Like I mean, I think Sebastian played 6 chains in a row or whatever at the top tables. You go to Nationals, Briar. Like that's when the format needs to change. And when I don't know. That's just what I'm always in favor of is right down that middle lane with a few outskirting decks. One that's a little more fatiguey, one that's a little more aggro, and then the rest of the decks kind of mingling in the middle somewhere.
Yeah.
Maybe a combo deck or two, just to keep people on their toes.
Exactly.
Yep. The game is in the most healthy state when you can pick aggro or control or mid-range or combo and
still be viable.
Yep. When there's I'd say generally when there's at least 6 viable decks in the format, that's a healthy game state. And that's actually 100%. Quite difficult. Traditionally in TCGs, you'd normally see 2 or 3. Like 4 would be already a little bit of a record there. So
yeah. I'm okay with there only being like 2 decks that are like for sure tier 1, because it's so hard to avoid a format where there isn't a couple of decks that are just simply better than most of the other decks. But a lot of decks are going to fall into that tier 2 to tier 1.5 range where they, with a skilled pilot, can take on those other decks. They might not have a winning record against those decks, but when you go through the course of a tournament, as long as you don't play that deck every round and you're a skilled pilot with your deck, you're going to do all right, so.
I mean, eventually once we have like 20, 25 heroes, the benefit of playing a more of an underdog hero will grow. Like one of the things I noticed is that people that joined Flesh and Blood in Monarch or Tales of Aria do not know how to play against Dorinthia. Because
definitely.
Like the people that were there in the first 3 sets, they know what they're doing. Or the people that played Dorinthia know what they're doing. Right?
Shout out to Sam Blitch.
Yeah. So that is that's something else to consider, is that if you're the underdog for a while, but you're still a viable underdog, you actually can gain those final that it can be what boosts you from 45 to 55% win rate by just being a little bit of a curveball that people just are not familiar with how to play against you.
Knowledge is power in games. I mean, throwing a card in your deck, even if it's suboptimal sometimes, and people just have to read the card, are not ready for the card. Exactly. I mean, it throws off people's math. Like sticking pummels in your deck, when people didn't expect pummel, or sticking razor reflexes in your deck when people didn't expect razor. Just throwing off the math. That's all it takes.
The value of having a single blue pummel as just part of your mana base is gigantic. They're like, wait. He's running blue pummel. That means he's probably running yellow pummel and red pummel.
Yep.
So then they're like, oh, that you can just run one copy of it, and that's already enough to throw people off. So
we talked about that a lot in the chain format with Razor Reflex.
One Razor, you mill it, they're scared of it the whole game.
Exactly.
They don't know you have it, then you go flock Razor, and they're like, oh no. And then you just sandbag the hell out of the Razor for 4 turns.
As soon as they see the first one,
so
every turn at the end game becomes difficult for them.
This actually kind of made me think about something. So this is the banned and restricted announcement. So there actually was another option for them to go down. They could have restricted Plunder Run to one copy. Of each pitch. They could have restricted the Ball Lightning to one copy each. I mean, that is almost never seen in
like a semi-limited, and then an unlimited version. I played Yu-Gi-Oh for quite a while, and that's exactly what they have: is a banned, a restricted, and then a semi-limited list. And so you can play 2 of cards, you can play 1 of cards, or cards are banned. And so
at the moment they have never restricted anything, and I really hope they don't do that, because that just creates another headache for casual players, or even like it's just another thing you have to keep track of. I rather just have it. Can I play it or can I not play it?
Yeah. And I think that's the cool thing about like saying that, right? It gives them the option for future game design. But in the beginning of a game, it's almost never correct to try to limit a card. In a game like Yu-Gi-Oh, it worked perfectly because a game like Yu-Gi-Oh has what we call board wipes. You know, imagine a card in Flesh and Blood, like a Wrath of God effect in Magic or something, you know, that just like your opponent starts going off, and then you're like, nullify all of your attacks for the turn, or something that does
heal. At the end of turn, heal all the damage you took.
Yeah, exactly. Something that eliminates an entire board state from happening. Those are the kinds of cards that you can play around with like you can play 1 of that card or whatever. And so that worked well in Yu-Gi-Oh. But for a game like this, we just don't have anything like that yet. But we might get something like that down the line.
Probably restrict certain colors of cards or something, instead of like killing the card altogether or making 1 of each color. You never know.
Right, because if you told people they could play 3 blue ball lightnings, they still wouldn't do it.
Right.
So, I guess on that note, I guess we'll see whatever Fest brings us, and then we could possibly go on a tier list and do a video about that. I know a lot of people would want to hear our thoughts on the list, on the tier list, the Prism #1 list. So, any final words before we hop off here tonight?
I think we're all in agreement that we're fairly happy with what happened and agree with the decision.
Dodge that bullet. Just goes to show, if you complain enough, you'll get what you want.
I think overall these are generally positive changes. The only thing that I'm going to wait and see about is how they handle the errata on the Briar tokens.
Yes. And one thing about that, they did put in the post, they were like, this is not something we want to do. They said, you know, errata-ing, they know how bad errata-ing is, and they don't want to do that often. They said this is kind of an extremely special circumstance because of the way that Briar was worded, and how impactful that was on the game. They don't want to ban heroes. And so because the effect was on a hero, they just had to change the effect. Or if it was on a card itself, they would have just banned the card. But they don't want to ban any of their heroes. So I think that's probably correct.
They want them to retire, not be exiled.
Yep,
exactly.
Very true. Very true. But yeah, if you guys stuck with us throughout this entire video, we freaking appreciate it. If you liked the video, click like. If you didn't like the video, take a deep breath, click F5, watch the video again. I know it was 50 minutes long. Apologize for that. We just had a lot to say here.
It was worth it.
It's very worth it. And I guarantee you'll like it the second time when you watch it the second time and you look down and it's 2 a.m. You're like, wow, 2 hours of my life are gone. We've got an announcement for Patreon, so it's the announcement of the Patreon. We're gonna have that up probably later this week, and yeah, subscribe, and you're gonna see a lot from us, because this this shit just got interesting. So
This is only the beginning.
This is only the beginning.
Yep.
And we have a preview card coming, so
We'll have that.
That's
What's our date? The
Excelente.
27th?
27th.
We got 16 days, 16 days. So we're gonna produce some really neat content with that card. So
Yep.
hopefully,
Everfest hype.
oh, I'm so excited! I'm so
There
excited.
we go.
I'm just excited about the Nacho Libre card, but we're not gonna talk about that today.